Yes, age verification. Very important topic. There's millions of people around the world want to be able to prove their age with minimal friction, maximum privacy, so that they can continue to watch porn, right? That seems to be the pressing. That seems to be what's driving all this. But anyway,
Speak for yourself.
Before we, I didn't say it was me. I said millions of citizens. So yeah, can you just introduce yourself first before we dive in?
Thank you. Yes, you're one of 60% of UK adults that uses porn, if you are one of those. But fortunately, we've moved on now, and age verification is about a lot more than just the adult industry, which is actually quite helpful because it destigmatizes the whole process, which was one of the challenges in the early days. Anyway, I'm Iain Corby. I am the Executive Director of the Age Verification Providers Association. We're a very small niche trade body. We've grown from 6 members when we started back in 2018 to 33 today, all around the world. And we handle public affairs, so raising public awareness of the concept of age verification, i.e. making the internet age aware, which is our sort of tagline. And then working with policymakers to pass laws, regulators to come up with decent regulations, making sure the regulators then enforce them, because sadly these days people don't comply voluntarily. They comply when the cost of compliance is cheaper than the cost of non-compliance. And we also have a large amount of practical work to do in terms of building international standards and creating the opportunity for interoperability across our members so we can compete with the big boys at Apple and Google, or with this government identity which is increasingly coming at us.
Wow, amazing. Thanks. I'm not part of the 60%, just to put it out there. I also would like to apologise. I'm looking at my picture thinking age verification, and I look a lot older now than I did when I shared the picture.
Well, I don't know who that bloke is, but it's not me.
But yeah, my name's Mark Harvey. I'm basically the old CEO of what was Sekura before we got acquired by XConnect on the 1st of April. New job title yet to be decided. It may have age in the title, I'm not sure. But yeah, my background, very quickly, many years working with colleagues such as Helen and Gotham and Adri at the GSMA and with mobile operators all around the world. Trying to herd everything together, similar to what you were saying there, Iain, really. I think it's interesting what we've been talking about today. There's lots of different things going on about wallets, identity, how they're used, when they're used, and so on and so forth. And I think we all need to maybe all come on stage together and make a plan, because we've been talking about this type of stuff for many years. In fact, Gotham Hazara used to have hair when we started and no longer has. So I think, yeah, look, there's hopefully going to be an interesting discussion today. I've got 5 young children that age is an issue. I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience have got children that are on the internet and on their phones daily as well. And we want to keep them safe going forward. So yeah, very much looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, well, obviously age verification has always been an issue, but it seems to be particularly pressing now, and that's mainly because of regulatory change. So Iain, maybe I can start with you and ask you to give a kind of brief overview of how regulators are approaching this topic and some of the key acts that we're seeing around the world.
Yes, quick canter around jurisdictions that I know and love. To be fair to Germany, they started this first about 20 years ago with an interstate treaty. So the KJM and FSM are their state-level regulators there who certify age assurance products at this point in time. They've got about 100 that they've certified. They've really struggled in their courts to impose these laws, particularly on adult sites based outside of Germany. The best example was when they blocked xhamster. They blocked de.xhamster.com. The following day, deu.xhamster.com popped up, and somehow they managed to redirect all the traffic from the first to the second. So it's really tough. The French have also been having a go. They keep writing and rewriting their legislation, but they have introduced now some very tough rules for adult sites, including including what we call the double blind requirement. So this is using zero knowledge proof or any other form of privacy enhancing technology to guarantee that the website can never find out the name of the user and that the age verification provider can't tell which websites the user is visiting. Now that created a few issues for us in the industry, because if we don't know who is relying on the age check, it's really hard to send them an invoice. So we've had to be, while a lot of these data protection authorities have created lovely, beautiful academic solutions, they always seem to forget that thing called the market and what pays for it. In a broader European sense, we have the Digital Services Act. Yesterday, the Article 28 guidelines were published in draft by the Commission, very explicitly looking for age verification, which is the hard, what is your actual age and date of birth approach for higher risk use cases, including pornography and buying age-restricted goods, but allowing age estimation for lower risk things like, for example, imposing a minimum age in your terms and conditions, as some of the social media platforms do. Actually, we think age estimation can be just as rigorous as age verification. If you're as old as I am and you estimate that I'm over 18, you'd have to have some really bad software to get that wrong. So with a bit of a buffer age, it works. We also have people who can estimate your age from how you move your fingers, which I just think is extraordinary, but it works with 99% success at differentiating adults from children. And then in the US, about 25 states have passed laws requiring age verification for adult content. There's a number now looking at App Store-based age verification, which is perhaps something we can talk about later. We're not entirely sure that's going to work out. And in the UK, of course, we've got the Online Safety Act, and since January, all dedicated porn sites have had to do age verification. From July, all user-to-user services, so social media or any other site that allows people to interact, will have to do so as well. And actually, it turned out that Pornhub decided that they weren't a porn site, they were a user-to-user service, so they won't be complying until July. But we haven't worried too much about 6 months between friends, as long as Ofcom is rigorous on the beginning of July. And finally, in Australia, where we're doing a massive trial of age assurance technology, they are bringing in a minimum age of 16 for social media for kids, and the New Zealanders just said they might do the same. Plenty of other countries interested in this, but those are the ones we tend to focus on.
And is there a jurisdiction where you think they're doing this well, and that they will provide the best example to the rest of the world?
No, and they're all doing it completely differently, and
Right.
this is utter chaos. And one of the reasons we put so much effort into international standards like IEEE 2089.1 and the ISO, which has just got to the FDIS level, so we'll be ready in October 27566, is to try to then educate the regulators to point to the standards so that we can do it the same everywhere, because it's called the World Wide Web for a reason.
Okay. So this is a mobile ecosystem forum, so we need to know what role mobile and other mobile networks and other stakeholders can play. So, Mark, how would you summarise the role?
Well, when you look at, I'll talk from a UK perspective at the moment, but I think the average age now of a child having a mobile phone is 11. We speak around education a lot. It's great that you've rattled off all of those regulations. I'm not sure of how many people in the room have ever read them, understand them, or have seen them before. So education is key, right? But ultimately, I think we need to not focus so much on the outward, but the inward, and actually start talking to our children about online safety and how to use mobile phones effectively. Bearing in mind, at 11 years old, the parent gives them the phone, and to your point, they're on that thing called www, right? They can access pretty much anything today. There's a lot of parental locks that mobile operators offer, which are kind of going in the right direction. But when you then take it a step further, I think the US market have got it right, where as channel providers in getting access to that data, we can see who's in the family plan, right? So if I was a US subscriber and I've got my wife and children, etc., I can see what child's got what number, the age of that child, etc., right? So in the US, I think they're going in the right direction. I think the European operators and AgeAware, I think it'd be great for you guys to look at it, you're innovators in the space, giving us access to the family plans, right? So if somebody's got multiple numbers on their accounts, who's actually in control of that number, who's using it day to day? I'm sure from a database perspective to put a simple date of birth on that number, so that again, if a site or somebody's trying to access that site, you can't, right? It's restricted. So I think the mobile operators have got a massive role to play in this. I think it can be commercialized by you as well. There's quite a few people in the room, similar to us here at Sekura and XConnect, that have got a lot of enterprises that would be interested in the space. So for me, though, educate our kids, first of all, right? Let them understand the dangers of this type of stuff, keep them away, from these adult sites especially. But then when you look at Facebook, X as it's called now, Snapchat and whatever, I think across Europe, and you'll keep me straight here, it ranges from about 13 up to 16. I think they're trying to implement things. It is coming together, right? We've got to work together and understand, but education is absolutely key.
What role, the previous panel, they talked all about this kind of invisible background number verification. What role will that play in this space?
So I think that would be great. If you take that use case where I want to access a site, I'm going to use mobile auth or seamless auth, there's many different names for it, but my number is tied into that family plan where my date of birth is already accessed or tied to it. It stops the access immediately, right? There's none of this, do I now need to check again? Do I now need to fill in an additional form? That date of birth's tied to the number. Okay, the onus might still then be on the parent to put that in, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's not necessarily a silver bullet, right? Somebody's got to take accountability, and I'd like to think if we're good parents, we'd fill in that information correctly.
Iain?
Just to follow up on some of those themes, we first got involved with MEF about 5 years ago because I thought, why haven't these mobile network operators all come running into this market?
Yeah.
And we kindly have a reciprocal arrangement between the two associations. And the first question is, how much do you want to get into this, right? It's quite a complex situation. And then the next question is, what liability are you happy to take? So some of the laws we're seeing passing in the US are involving $10,000 per day per failure. And if you've got 500 kids in Idaho who are illegally gaining access because you have some duff data that you got from a mobile network operator, that could be quite an expensive failure in the system. So we need to think these things through. And then what's the upside, of course? In the early days, we were charging 40, 50 cents per check. We're now down, according to the UK government, at around 10 cents per check. And we would expect that to continue to fall to single cents, if not fractions of a cent per check over time, particularly through the onset of interoperability. But I do think that's something where mobile operators might be able to help us, and particularly the operating systems as well. I mean, we have now created a little progressive web app that we can put tokens into on your device, including mobile devices. So having done an age check once, you wouldn't have to repeat it for other sites. And we have a commission-based arrangement between our providers so that if they reuse somebody else's check, they share some of the revenue with them for reusing the check. So it's kind of win-win all round. But I'm sure there are ways we can merge the two sort of technologies here. But don't get too excited that it's a necessarily multi-million-dollar revenue stream. And also, first of all, we need to look at the data. I've always said the starting point would be a data quality audit to understand what you think is the age of your user versus the actual age of that customer, and see what sort of percentage accuracy we're getting. It may be, I mean, the other thing is we do proportionality here very strictly. So it may be for a lot of use cases, if you're 90% right, that's good enough. We don't try to do 100%. That becomes incredibly restrictive on adults generally. But for other use cases like buying a knife, which has now in the UK become an identity process, but it's a very, very high level of assurance for age as well.
So I know that you're working quite closely with the Australian regime. Just to sort of make this quite concrete for the audience, what can you tell us about how that scheme works and what lessons you're learning from that?
Yes, so the Australian government, a couple of years ago, the opposition, eSafety, which is their main online safety regulator, called for a trial of age assurance because they weren't sure whether the technology was mature enough. The government ummed and ahed for a long time and then eventually said no. On one of my visits to Australia, I popped in to see the opposition and they said, this is a great idea, we'll put $6 million into a trial in our manifesto. And guess what? 6 weeks later, the government changed its mind and did the same. So we were able to respond to a tender which the Age Check certification scheme won. ACCS is a UK accreditation service conformity assessment body, and they're pretty much the only people in the world who test that Age Check systems work. So it wasn't surprising that they won that tender. And they are now checking independently 51 participants who've put forward their solutions. And that is not just the classic age verification providers. You've got Meta and Snap and Google and potentially Apple putting forward their solutions, as well as other people elsewhere in the stack. We have I get my Connect IDs and Select IDs confused. Connect ID, I think, is the Australian banking one where they're bringing together information from banks to allow you to prove your age. I don't specifically remember any of the telcos actually being involved in Australia, which is interesting in itself. But there would have been an opportunity, obviously, to put that forward. That will report in June, and it's not a procurement exercise for the government, but it will say, for example, when in December this minimum age of 16 comes in, these are the methods that would be suitable for implementing that particular law. Or when they bring their Class 2 codes out for online safety, there will be different methods that perhaps are suitable for different harms in those safety codes.
So Iain just talked about telcos not being involved in this Australian pilot. What, Mark, from your point of view, I know you worked on Mobile Connect, I believe. So
It was Gotham's fault.
It's still got the scars. Yeah. What are the biggest barriers to mobile stakeholders, MNOs, carriers, diving into this market and making some money from it?
So I think when you look at a mobile operator, they come at this, they look at each other as competitors. Ordinarily, from an identity perspective, it's nice to see that they're now actually coming together. But there's cost for them as well, right? They can't just, it's not a flick of a switch and it's just there, the data's available. There's a cost, and because there's a cost, there's got to be a business case. And to create the business case of the people in this audience today, right? We've got to prove to the mobile operators, and I think, you just said, Iain, this isn't going to be worth potentially millions and millions and millions of dollars. Mobile operators want to earn millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? So I think commercially we've got to come up with a way of ensuring that everybody in the ecosystem can earn money from this. But I don't think this is just an age verification problem. We've spoken today and heard it from a few people, this magic word that we've been talking about from many, many years called digital identity. And I think the question maybe we need to ask ourselves at what age does somebody receive a digital identity? Is it at birth? Is it when they're 5? Is it when they're 10? When is it? If we get that bit right, this age thing just becomes part of that conversation.
Of course, yeah. Right?
And I think the mobile operators at that point are very well versed. In many countries now, they've got phenomenal KYC products. The match rates are pretty much off the charts in a lot of countries. So to me, the mobile operators are very, very well positioned to be part of this identity ecosystem for sure. But yeah, to me, let's not keep working in silos. Let's answer that bigger question, when do I get my digital identity and at what age? And I think a lot of these problems that we've discussed for many years at that point go away, and we can all go off and earn loads of money.
Just on that connection to identity, we get a bit shirty when people think of age as just some sort of subset of identity, by the way, because we like to think...
We're going to have a fight now.
We can prove your age without ever knowing who you are, particularly if all I'm doing is looking at how your fingers move, for example, but I still need a way of associating that test, that check, with the individual who's then wanting to use it and use it again in the future. But the EU was working with us on interoperability, and then they came up with their wallet, the digital ID wallet, UD wallet, and they thought, this is going to solve the problem. And then some people started saying, well, hang on, we weren't asked to design it for online age verification, and certainly not anonymous age verification. And whenever you use the European wallet, you're going to effectively tell people who you are. You prove your ID first, and then you prove other things about you. That doesn't really work for particularly like the adult industry, but also, frankly, for signing up to social media, where people don't currently are not required to identify themselves, but we are increasingly going to age check them. So it's not as easy as just using digital ID for that, but you can, of course, build digital IDs that are privacy preserving. And what the EU's now had to do as a concession is commission a new interim age verification app, which is a sort of a slimline version of the UD wallet, where they've removed a number of the requirements from the ARF to allow it to be privacy preserving. They say it's going to merge into the wallet, but they're going to have to completely redesign the wallet if they want to retain that privacy element. So as with a lot of interim solutions, it may become a permanent one. But at the moment, that's just targeting 18 plus. But the other aspect of this is physical proof of age. And a couple of us are off to DSIT this afternoon here in the UK to talk to the Secretary of State about digital ID in the UK. And one of the conversations is about how we use our phones to prove our age in a store. And that's another big opportunity, obviously, to work with mobile operators. We've built with the retailing and the hospitality industry an interoperable solution where you authenticate to your phone and then you create a QR code. And if you can show that QR code to the till, including a self-service till, you don't need to wait for the yellow light. You can just buy your beer and walk out of the store. And of course, that takes away the member of staff having to check your face matches some picture because it's all being done electronically. So there's lots of exciting opportunities there to in the physical world as well as the online world. And again, if we're doing all this on the mobile device, I would imagine mobile operators have an interest in becoming more involved.
No, most definitely. I think, though, back to what you were saying there, let's ask the right questions at the right time, rather than starting to build stuff and then realise when we take it to the enterprises, we've built something that's not going to work, right? And we've all learnt that on the mobile operator side and in many other parts of the world as well. So I think, again, not to repeat myself too many times, but come together, ask the right questions to the right people, get the right people involved. I know from a mobile operator perspective, nearly 10 years ago, we used to sit in rooms, but we weren't talking to the banks or things like that initially, right? And then we started to build services. When we then built something, we then brought people in and they went, it's not quite what we want. So let's stop making the same mistakes and bring the ecosystem together.
So Iain, you were just talking about this kind of secondary EU wallet that was a privacy preserving age verification only. Is that going to launch at the same time, and sometime in 2026?
Yeah, they're going at very high speed. So they've effectively commissioned Citalis and Deutsche Telekom to build this, what they call a white label app, which will be available for each member state to bespoke and put into the App Store for download in their country. Right. They've then looked for 3 volunteers from member states to lead the charge on this. 3 have been selected. I can't tell you who they are. I'm sworn to secrecy. But it turns out those 3 already have pretty well developed ideas of their own. So we're not quite sure whether they volunteered in order to integrate with the European solution, ask the European solution to copy their own solution, or to sabotage it. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But the aim is that there will be this single solution. And the reason the Commission wanted to do that is they felt they couldn't enforce the Digital Services Act without creating a practical mechanism for compliance. But it's a €2 million project at the moment, so it's a pretty small piece of work just to put that in place. And we do think, obviously, the private sector has come up with this interoperable solution using tokens, which is a good alternative as well.
It would be great, Iain, actually, look, it's your wheelhouse. So in terms of, we all carry a passport, we travel from country to country, it's accepted all over the world. In terms of these IDs, how are countries working together, if at all, in terms of age verification and interoperability?
Again, not multiple different systems. So we are trying to build global solutions. I mean, our clients are quite often global platforms. So one of our members, Yoti, does the Instagram age assurance. And clearly, they need that to operate around the world. They're turning on jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I mean, the other little problem we always have, and again, you might be able to help us, is where is somebody based? Because everybody just flips on a VPN, and then they can avoid all of that. So we work with GeoComply to try and see through those VPNs as we look at implementation state by state in the US or in Australia, but not the rest of the world. But so, yes, it's not in any way coordinated. Hence we think the best way to do that is through international standards.
Okay, I'm showing 3 minutes left, so quick question, Adri, yeah?
A comment and then a question. So in the UK, we as operators are working on improving the existing age verification API to bring on an extra attribute, which is the content lock, which means has the phone number switched on the content lock on or off. And this means that what the content lock is, by the way, when you buy a prepaid SIM, you cannot navigate into the website. So for a prepaid user, as you know, which doesn't have a registration in the UK, it's a very, very good indication that is the user, do they have content lock on or off? So that's an extra attribute we're adding, all as operators in the UK. I just wanted to point out, the thing that I found super interesting was the Ofcom had ranked this as under their section of highly effective age assurance. Are you aware of that? And like the question I have is, are you aware, and like what do you think this will drastically change the existing product that we have today?
Yeah, so Ofcom has listed a number of things highly effective, which, for example, email-based age estimation is highly effective. And they've mentioned mobile operator data as well. It's still up to the digital service to be compliant. So we've not really ever done a certification of that method of age assurance independently to say, well, when somebody calls up and says, could you lift this block, how rigorous is that process? Are we really confident that it's stopping 99% of kids lifting that block? Because that would be effectively what we'd be looking for highly effective. Even though Ofcom says it's okay, you'll still have to persuade the relying parties who are on the hook if it goes wrong that that is a highly effective method.
Thanks.
Okay, one last question.
There's growing scientific evidence that giving mobile phones and letting kids below 16 accessing, social media is nasty. Anorexia, bullyism, loss of attention, loss of concentration, all that. I know this is a business conference, so we're trying to make money out of age verification, but wouldn't it be simpler to have a simple rule that under 16, it's a bit like cigarettes. You don't give kids a phone. I'm interested in your opinion.
What a question before lunch. Yes. Great idea.
So,
No, sorry, I just facetious. Sorry. No, look, I think something like that sounds good on paper. It'll look good in a slide. Practicalities, next to zero, right? You as a parent are going to be the one that's going to stop your kids smoking, buying alcohol, and so on and so forth. Good luck to telling a 14, 15-year-old boy full of testosterone they're not going to have a mobile phone for another 2 years, right? And the social pressure children are put under today is immense, right? If they're not on their Snapchat group or whatever, bullying, all kinds of things. And one of my kids has been, unfortunately victimized with that as well. So it's a wider, bigger problem, right, that, again, collectively we've got to answer. It's not just as easy as saying we're going to put a ban on it and it stops.
And very quickly, we work closely with some child rights advocates and the Five Rights Foundation. You might think they think that's a great idea. They don't. They look at the upside for kids of networking and information and connection. So actually what we're going to get in Australia, and they are going to do a proper independent evaluation with academics, is a experiment in a state where we can look in a year's time when they have done that ban to say, did test scores go up, but how did people's general well-being fare? Are the kids happier or not? So it's very good of Australia to offer to be an experiment for the world, but I'd watch closely to see what happens.
I mean, it's such an interesting question because is this a moral panic? Is there something fundamentally damaging about smartphones, or is it just the latest moral panic after video games, comic strips, novels, all sorts of things, new things have caused this kind of panic. So we don't really know, we won't know probably for a generation how bad it is. Anyway, that's a big question to go to lunch with. How long do we have, Susan?
We have an hour.
An hour. Okay, so I'll see you back here in an hour's time, and thank you very much, Iain and Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.